Hello everybody and welcome back to Mr. Matt's teaching channel. Today we're going to be talking about drugs in sports. This is part 2 edition, so if you've not managed to watch part 1, I highly suggest you watch that today. We're going to be continuing with our presentation where we're going to be looking today at wrapping up this unit, and we're going to be looking at the implications of taking drugs for the sport and the performer, and we're also going to be looking at what organisations are out there to try to combat the use of performance-enhancing drugs and what strategies they are using. We're also going to be looking at the challenges and problems that organisations face when trying to catch drugs cheats. So let's get back to our presentation. I'm going to quickly recap what we did last video. So here we are. We talked about what are the current issues in sports. We looked at this was the 2012 Olympic Games 100-meter finals, and where we saw 4 out of the 8 competitors had previously been banned for drugs. I'm just going to quickly whip through these because you should have already gotten knowledge of these, but it's good to recap. This was the Seoul Olympic Games in '88, and this was probably one of the worst events for performance-enhancing drugs taken. So we can look at this photo, and 6 out of the 8 athletes had in their career either been caught or admitted to taking performance-enhancing drugs, which is obviously a big disgrace for athletics and sprinting in particular. We looked at what a drug is, and we know it's a substance which has a physiological, quite often psychological as well, effect when introduced into the body, but it's not food, so it's a substance which has a physiological effect. We looked at why people have been taking drugs in sports. We mentioned that we're going to be doing covering 3 sports in this topic. This is the AQA specification from the 2017 A-level physical education, and we are looking at anabolic steroids, EPO, and beta blockers. We looked at a bit of a background about the reasons for taking drugs in sports. We looked at social reasons that performers have given in the past, like pressure, for example, or financial reward, or the fact that they want instant success. We looked at Dwayne Chambers, and he's a very good example to use as an athlete who was taking performance-enhancing drugs, anabolic steroids, to improve his sprinting performance. Still the 4th fastest man in British history, and a European 60-meter record holder for sprinting. We also looked at some psychological reasons why performers may take drugs, and we looked at the fact that it might increase confidence or reduce anxiety in different settings. We started to look at our 3 sports, so anabolic steroids. We looked at what they did, why people would use them. Looked at some examples here. We've got Marion Jones, who we will discuss today. We've got Dwayne Chambers here, who we already talked about. We've got Safa Powell, who was in our 2012 lineup, and we've got Ben Johnson, who was in probably the most disgraced race in Olympic history. But we also had our female athlete here from Russia. So just to make up the banned substance list for anabolic steroids. We also mentioned that the drugs that people take also generally have some side effects, negative side effects, which occur in the body, and these can include lots of different things: heart disease, stroke, facial hair, behavior changes, aggression, generally negative things which you do not want to take and do not want to experience. We also looked at beta blockers. So these basically bind to nerve receptors to make people remain calm and stay composed during events. So we said, events such as archery and snooker and shooting might be some good events for athletes to take these to try to keep them calm, keep them composed. They reduce anxiety, but they also obviously reduce your heart rate and also reduce your aerobic capacity, which can lead to low blood pressure and ultimately feeling lightheaded and potential fainting because of these, and fatigue, of course. Then we looked at our example of Kim Jong-soo, who was the 19-year-old North Korean shooter who was found to take beta blockers after the Beijing Olympics and was banned, lifetime ban, from the Olympic Games for this. Then we started to look at erythropoietin, EPO, formerly also known as, so you can use just EPO in your exams. We discussed how it is naturally occurring within the body, but also synthetically produced within the laboratory, meaning that it's very hard to detect, and that causes a lot of problems for testing. It basically increases the number of red blood cells. So you think about the advantages of having an increased number of red blood cells, especially to endurance athletes, where it's going to increase the hemoglobin content and therefore the oxygen carrying capacity of the body. Therefore, obviously taking the oxygen to the working muscles, working aerobically rather than anaerobically, and obviously producing more ATP without experiencing the byproducts of working anaerobically, meaning they could work for faster, for longer periods of time without becoming fatigued. Okay, we looked at a couple of our athletes. We looked at Lance Armstrong and Jet 2, who were both found to be taking EPO for endurance events. But what we didn't discuss were the side effects, which are that it's going to, if you have an increased number of red blood cells, it's going to increase the blood viscosity, which basically means that the blood is thicker. And because your blood's thicker, it can lead to blood clotting within your veins and arteries. And that, if you have blood clots within your system, that can ultimately lead to stroke, causing heart attack or thrombosis, as well as also side effect from those blood clots. Okay, that's the recap. A lot of information just covered, but you should have already known that already. So that was very much a brief recap of what we covered in our last presentation. If you haven't watched that in depth, go and watch that because I talk about it in more detail. Okay, moving on to positive and negative implications to the sport and to the performer for taking drugs. Now, with these, the positives are actually not many. It's generally negative implications, as you can probably imagine. So probably the only positive to the sport for allowing the taking of drugs was that it raises the performance level of the athletes. And you think about that, and you think about the additional effects that may have. So it may become a better entertainment spectacle. May therefore lead to more spectators watching it, more commercialization deals. But the likely factor of it is that there's not many other positives which can be gained from taking performance enhancing drugs. The Olympic motto itself is faster, higher, stronger, and that is derived from the Latin motto. If you can go and look that up yourself, and you can see that it directly translates to faster, higher, stronger, which kind of leads itself to pushing the body further and further and further. But hopefully that can just be through natural means rather than drugs. So let's look at some of the negatives then. Cheating by taking banned substances leads to negative views from the public. So if you've got a negative view of the sport from the public, you can probably think about some sports which are directly related to drugs cheats, and they generally have a negative reputation because even if you see the performance, maybe you're not fully appreciative of it because you always have a suspicion that someone's maybe taking drugs to help their performance. So that sport themselves may lose integrity through multiple high-profile cases. So the one I'm thinking about right now, you may be thinking about as well, is the Tour de France. Obviously, cycling events. Obviously, Lance Armstrong was the winner of that many times. But there have been a lot of other high-profile athletes in cycling that have been caught. And there is very much the suspicion that if you are winning the Tour de France, then there's a high chance possibility that you have been or are taking performance-enhancing drugs to improve your performance. So that sport themselves may lose integrity with the public. It's going to obviously put negative role models within society, which we obviously don't want to happen, and because we want obviously our children growing up having good positive role models who value integrity, and this is obviously not going to happen if we are showing these athletes who are maybe regarded high within society, but then later on in their career they are caught taking drugs. It's only going to produce a negative effect. It also increases the acceptance of drug use within sport, which again, for our young athletes, they may feel that they have to take these drugs to take part and compete in sport. We heard a Dwayne Chambers interview. He said that he felt that he couldn't win unless he took them because he had a suspicion that other athletes were taking them as well. And the evidence obviously is correct, because we looked at two events of the Olympic Games finals, and it is true that athletes have and are taking performance-enhancing drugs. So you can probably compete to a level, but if you want to win the title, then maybe you do have to take the performance-enhancing drugs, unfortunately, to be able to challenge them, which is kind of what we just mentioned. Could lead to reduced funding opportunities for the sport. So, if the sport's only seen as they're obviously abusing drugs and abusing the system, then funding may be pulled from different organisations. And this is an interesting one. You can have a look at the media link, which I will send you and post in the comments box. It's basically summary from WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, was that in 2014 there was 3,800 positive samples taken. So that's from, actually, if I remember rightly, around about 300,000 samples taken around the world, and 3,800 were positive. Out of those, athletics provided 261 positive samples, and cycling produced 221 positive samples. So that's around the world at all levels for the organisations that obviously tested them for performance-enhancing drugs. And we only generally hear about just the minority, maybe the high-profile cases within the media. So the elite, the top of the top. Generally, we don't hear about just the professional athletes who get caught and banned. We generally only hear about the very minority ones, the household names when they get caught. That's generally big media coverage. But there's a lot happening, and a lot of people getting caught who aren't the top of the top, and it just does not get reported because there's so many of them. It doesn't make good news. So again, that's the sport. Let's look at the positive and negative implications to the performer themselves. So they are, again, there's not many positives. There's a lot more negatives than positives, and some do overlap with the sport itself. So yes, if you take drugs as a performer, it's likely to increase your performance levels and therefore increasing your chances of winning. If you win, you are likely to receive prize money, and you could potentially receive sponsorship deals if sponsors see you as a good positive athlete and role model, obviously not knowing that you are taking drugs. So it could lead to fame and fortune, but that's kind of where the positives stop. So there's only 2 of them. There's lots and lots of negatives. So negative of taking drugs in sport is that if you are a clean athlete and you're not taking drugs, but you win a race, maybe in a sport which has a high number of confirmed drugs cases, you will be treated with suspicion. So that's obviously not good for you as a performer, and you'll be treated with suspicion all the way through your career and even after your career is finished. And maybe they might not truly appreciate the technical performance of you as a clean athlete. Secondly, it's going to have health risks to you, both in the short term and the long term. We've already looked at the side effects of anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids, by the way, make up around about 48% of the overall positive samples. So top one is anabolic steroids. Second one is EPO. And the third one is actually masking agents to try to hide the fact that you're using performance-enhancing drugs. And we'll look into masking agents a little bit later. But basically, athletes, if they are taking performance-enhancing drugs, they may take a substance which kind of tries to flush the drugs out of the system so it doesn't show up on a test. So the World Anti-Doping Agency actually banned the use of masking agents because if you're taking them, it's likely you've already taken performance-enhancing drugs. So athletes try to take them to try to get a negative test result. Following a positive test, the athletes themselves, if you get caught taking drugs, you are very likely to lose your sponsorship deals, and generally you might even get asked to give your prize money back, which has happened many times, and there might be court cases against you, which we'll talk about today. Could also lead to legal action. There have been cases where people have been sent to prison for either taking drugs and cheating or for lying to, for example, federal agents in the USA. And we're going to talk about Marion Jones very shortly, who got sent to prison for 6 months. Obviously, if you get caught taking drugs, you're likely to be ousted from the actual team, and you'll be viewed and maybe isolated because you'll have negative views from the rest of the national team who are not going to accept you back into the team. In fact, there was a big problem when Dwayne Chambers was allowed to compete again for Team GB, and he was obviously a sprinter, a relay sprinter, and his teammates did not want him on the team because he had already committed the drug offences, which obviously caused problems and rifts within that team. If you are constantly abusing drugs, it can also lead to psychological problems over the long term as well. And obviously, we're going to provide negative role models to our growing young potential athletes. So let's have a look at another example in detail. So let's look at probably the most high-profile case there is of drugs in sport, which is our Lance Armstrong, our cyclist, who managed to cheat and hide his drug involvement over 10 years plus, and basically never got caught officially taking drugs until one of his teammates came out as a whistleblower and basically spilt the beans and told everybody what was happening. But before that, he was considered just an amazing athlete, a clean athlete, basically a one of a kind. And obviously he has got a lot of, positive traits, I suppose. But, to win all of those medals, you can think about it, even with taking drugs is a big feat. But obviously he was not a clean athlete, and that's not what we want in our sport. So he was taking EPO, and he was also blood doping. So blood doping is when he would remove blood from his own system and then allow the body to recuperate and regenerate that blood. And then maybe just before competition, he'd re-inject the blood into his system. So therefore, he had a greater hematocrit, so a greater number of red blood cells, which obviously meant he could have a greater oxygen carrying capacity. Same with EPO. It's a similar effect. It's just going to increase the red blood cell count. So he was doing both of those things throughout his career. And I've already mentioned that because these are naturally occurring in the body, it's very hard to detect in athletes. Very, very hard and difficult. So that was the problem and why he escaped positive tests over the years. Obviously, he had a very high hematocrit level all the way through, but that was generally because he was taking those performance enhancing drugs. So what happened to him? So he was ordered to pay $10 million in damages and settlements in a range of court cases. He was actually sued by the US government for a further $100 million because I believe that he was sponsored by the US government postal service, and they were suing him for basically giving a negative image of the sport. He actually counter-argued and said that, you know, even as a drugs cheat, he basically raised the profile of the organization. So he obviously went to court and he was sued initially for $100 million, but I believe that since then there has been a settlement which he's come to agree. He also lost all of his major sponsors. He was one of the poster boys, you could say, for Nike, and he had his own brand, which was Live Strong. So they all obviously all stripped away and distanced themselves from him because they didn't want that negative view as from the organization and the business themselves. So they kind of distanced themselves away from Lance. He was also stripped from all of his titles and erased from the record books for all of his events that he competed in. So he's no longer a title holder, and that's one example of what can happen if you're found taking drugs in your sport. The second example is related to Marion Jones. You can kind of see her in the background here. She basically came to fame in the 2000 Olympic Games in Sydney, where she was actually the first woman to win 5 medals at an Olympic Games, where she won 3 gold and 2 bronze. She was later stripped of these. She was caught taking THG, which is an anabolic steroid, which was actually nicknamed the Clear because it was undetectable by the testing authority. So when they test them samples, they couldn't actually detect this drug within the system. One of the reasons why they couldn't detect it is because it was made by a pharmaceutical company in the US, so in San Francisco, and it's part of what's very much known as the Balco scandal. So the Bay Area, obviously San Francisco Bay, the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative. So you should definitely know what that is, and you should make sure you understand Balco. Basically, they supplied not only Marion Jones, but a number of athletes, including Dwayne Chambers, with this drug, which was undetectable. Now, again, these things don't just, at the time, everyone thought it was great. Well, the athletes thought it was great because undetectable was doing some great physiological changes within their body. They were winning medals. They were the best in the world. But obviously these things don't last forever, and eventually the truth will come out. So there was a whistleblower at Balco who went to federal agents, and they investigated the case, and they eventually, found the list of athletes who were actually taking these, and one of them was Marion Jones. and they interviewed her, and she obviously lied and said she'd never ever taken any performance enhancing drugs. And obviously, when the truth came out, she was then sent to jail for basically lying to the federal agents. So she was sent to 6 months in jail, and actually, I believe it was 800 hours of community service as well. So she stripped of all of her history, and I've got a little video to play for you regarding Marion Jones right here. So sit back, relax. This is Marion Jones, 5 minutes worth of video.
Away they go, and in lane 4, look at Jones go.
At the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, Marion Jones made history by becoming the first woman to win 5 medals at a single Olympic Games.
It's Marion Jones pulling away from the rest. It's going to be Jones all the way.
She was almost a once-in-a-generation type athlete. They do come along. And we were watching a new star being born.
She seemed to come across as a very nice, genuine person.
It's Olympic gold for Jones by a street from Tanu. Wow! This is the Olympic Games. You're not supposed to win by that much.
She was the professional athlete of the millennium.
And how much did that mean to her? And now the tears can come. Now the emotion can come out.
Not long after Marion had won the first of her gold medals, an announcement was made that her husband, CJ Hunter, had tested positive for the banned anabolic steroid nandrolone.
I think there were suspicions, I mean, especially because of maybe her involvement with CJ. And definitely the suspicions were there, but she seemed to almost come out of it. And you almost felt sorry for her, the fact, oh, she was just involved with the wrong man. She was just naive. You kind of were willing to believe that she could be clean and that she could be that phenomenal athlete.
The case was soon forgotten in the wake of Marion's outstanding victories. And for years following the Olympics, life was pretty good for the sprinter. But she never seemed able to fully shake off the drug rumours, despite constant denials.
I have never, ever failed a drug test.
There was certainly an internal understanding within anti-doping circles that it was only a matter of time before she got caught.
In 2004, her then-boyfriend, sprinter Tim Montgomery, was banned from the sport for using steroids. The case was linked to the Balco doping scandal and consequently put Jones under the spotlight. Balco was an American laboratory under investigation for supplying top athletes with the anabolic steroid tetrahydrogestrinone, or THG. Jones denied any involvement. Then, in October 2007, Jones was forced to admit she had lied to federal agents.
I stand for what is right. I respect the judge's orders. And I truly hope that people will learn from my mistakes.
Marion Jones was sentenced to 6 months in prison for perjury and ordered to carry out 800 hours of community service. The International Olympic Committee stripped her of all her medals and erased her name from Olympic records.
It's incredibly damaging for the sport, but for her, she's left with nothing, absolutely nothing, and literally.
I think if one positive came out of that whole Balco thing, it was the fact that, if you get federal agencies, if it becomes a federal offence, that you can go to prison for taking drugs, for distributing drugs, then that's a plus, really, and that can all help to clean up sport.
Coaches, the suppliers, the people who are trying to make it easier and make money out of it, they're the ones who've got to be taken out of the system. They're the ones who we've got to really chase, in my view. Yes, we've got to make sure the athletes are caught, and because sometimes they lead you to those key individuals. But if you're not taking them out, they'll just happen again and again and again and again. And we'll see the sad stories of Marion Jones and other people, but the people behind the scenes will bounce back and come back and surface somewhere else. And that cannot be right.
Well, I think the first message to athletes is, do you know what? I wouldn't even try, because everything that's going on in the UK and internationally is making it harder and harder and harder for athletes to cheat. I mean, what we're trying to do here with the London Organising Committee, with government, with sports, is to put the fear of God into any athlete that thinks that they can cheat around the 2012 Games, at the 2012 Games, or in any major event that we're hosting in the UK. Look at Beijing. Look how many athletes in the UK have managed to do it clean. You know, there's some sensational British athletes and other athletes as well, people who work hard, work tirelessly, who don't take shortcuts and who are sensational role models. So you don't have to be a Marion Jones. You can be a clean athlete out there and win a gold medal.
Okay, that video there was produced by UCAD, and we're going to be discussing UCAD, which links very nicely to our next slide. We're going to discuss UCAD and some of their projects, and also on there was their logo of 100% Me campaign, which we will be discussing today. Okay, so UCAD, what are they? The United Kingdom Anti-Doping. So that is the organisation. It is the national organisation, basically, who are there to try to protect athletes' right to participate in clean sport. So they do that on a number of levels. So they do education and prevention and awareness programs and campaigns, such as the 100% Me, which we'll talk about soon. They also do testing and results management and analysis, and we'll look about how tests are completed very, very shortly as well. UCAD work with national governing bodies. They work with clubs themselves, coaches and athletes to ensure they comply with the World Anti-Doping Code. So I suggest you take a few minutes to have a look at this World Anti-Doping Code. It was actually only set up in 2004, or initially implemented in 2004. It's basically guidelines and rules and regulations for what kind of procedures you need to take for an athlete, and it gives a good list of banned substances as well. In fact, I'll try to get up now the list of banned substances from 2019. If you go on to the World Anti-Doping Agency, you can definitely see these. So here we go. This is the World Anti-Doping Agency Code of Prohibited List. So this was 2019 edition. As you can see, it's got lots and lots of pages of information about what athletes can use, what they cannot use. And let's have a little scroll down here. So lots and lots of pages, like I said, of banned substances. And number one, under S1, is anabolic agent. So here we're looking at our anabolic steroids, which we are covering, and there's lots and lots of different types. So it's not just one type of steroid, there's lots and lots of different types. And we can see here we've got THG, which is the substance which Marion Jones was taking, and also Dwayne Chambers. And again, lots and lots of different types of anabolic agents. We've also got EPO, which is our second one, S2, and basically that falls under the category of basically a substance which is similar to chemical substance or similar biological effects, which basically have these under the categories. There's lots and lots of different types of EPO, which you need to be aware of. And like I say, there's lots of different banned, prohibited substances on this list. And eventually we actually come to our third category, which is beta blockers, which falls under P1, which basically they are prohibited in competition only for certain sports, and for other sports they're also prohibited out of competition. And we can see what kind of sports they are related to there. And you can think about the advantages of that. You know, if you're a golfer and you're putting, you don't want to like a nervous, jerky movement from adrenaline. You want to stay calm and relaxed and composed during your putting and your stroke action. So have a look at WADA. Have a look at the World Anti-Doping Code, and have a look at the prohibited lists as well. If you go onto this website, you can have a look and a good view about what they are, what they do, and you can see exactly what they are doing. Okay, let's move back onto our presentation for you. So UCAD. So what else do they do, UCAD? They have a science management program, and obviously from that particular branch and region, they are looking at testing and making sure they are accurately getting the correct results and trying to catch as many doping offences as possible. They also run a program called the Athlete Biological Passport, the ABP, which is actually a very important thing which you should be aware of. Is basically they test athletes over time. So if you have one test, in 2020, for example, and you test the second year, 2021, they're going to plot your results on a graph. So if particularly, 2022, still the same, and then 2023, you suddenly got a big spike in a particular chemical within your body, then that would basically return an adverse findings test, which basically would be questionable and be looked into and under investigation further. So they're trying to track athletes, so they are basically they should have the same kind of chemical balance within their body all the way through their life, rather than having these spikes and troughs because they've been taking drugs at certain times. And the Athlete Biological Passport has been a very effective way of actually catching drugs cheats. Here's a few things about what they do from athletes themselves.
I have the right to compete in clean sport.
I have the right to participate in clean sport.
I have the right to compete in clean sport.
From its birth 5 years ago, the role that it's played in the sporting landscape is to be that independent voice and that independent tester and that independent authority across drug-free sport. I think it was absolutely right to do that before London 2012. It gave added credibility to us as a host nation. And I think over the next 5 years, it'll continue to play its role in testing our athletes and playing its part in securing drug-free sport in the UK.
At Youth Sport Trust, we one of the delivery organisations for the school games, and that's one of the first multi-sport environments and events that young people and young athletes are exposed to. And at that, we have the UCAD presence, so that the drugs education and also getting used to the sort of drug scrutiny and the processes around at the major events. So when they get to a Paralympics or Olympics, they already are familiar with that. But also seeing UCAD and anti-doping as an integral part of their support, not someone that's there to monitor or police them, but actually we're part of helping you compete fairly and properly as an athlete.
In the world of anti-doping, you have achieved a lot by participating in major events. You've helped us globally by aiding some new national anti-doping agencies to get up and running. You've had your experts from your team come and serve WADA on our committees, and you've been with us as we've travelled the world at various events.
With the new code, there are tougher sanctions. So if you're mistakenly putting in something in that you shouldn't do, then you are still wholly responsible for that. It's really important. Check out the 100% Me pages, find out what's out there, do your research before you take supplements, before you do something that could compromise your chance to do what we've all done, which is compete and clean in sport.
So that's a little bit more information about UCAD. So they're actually quite a young organisation in the world of sport. So they were only actually formed in 2009, and that, as of this recording, that's only 11 years ago, which is not a very long time in sport. And you may also know of some other national organisations which kind of oversee anti-doping. Probably the most common one is USADA, so United States Anti-Doping Agency. Obviously, we're looking at a UK exam board, so it's very important we relate all of our information and questions and answers to the United Kingdom model. So we're looking at UCAD in particular, and obviously they run programs, they support athletes and trying to help them not to make the mistake of taking performance-enhancing drugs, illegal performance-enhancing drugs, which are on the banned substance list. Now, the problems are that some supplements which you can buy over the counter and through pharmacies, they actually contain substances which are banned by WADA and on the prohibited list. So it's very important as an athlete you're aware of not only the prohibited list, but of what you're taking. Because even if you take that supplement or that medicine, that you take it without knowing, you are still responsible for what's in your system. So even you can no longer use the the excuse that you didn't know it was there, or you took it by mistake. That's not going to happen anymore. So there's tough sanctions on what's in your system, and you are responsible for what is in your system. Okay, give you a little bit more about their campaign of 100% Me, which they run as an organisation. So they run this 100% Me program, which basically saying that they want athletes to perform, and they want to do it 100% themselves. So it shouldn't be the fact that their performance is a product of what substances they're taking. It's hopefully through hard work and dedication. And they use this 100% Me logo and strapline basically as a campaign to raise awareness and to educate. Just like any campaign we talked about, what are we looking about for any campaign? To think about it, we're looking at addressing the issue, breaking stereotypes, raise awareness, educate the people, and hopefully bring out a positive change. And that change is going to be for people not taking performance-enhancing drugs. Let's have a look at their campaign, one of their campaign videos.
As an athlete, 100% Me means what you see on the track is 100% me. There is no other ingredients which are helping that performance. It's all about me.
True performance, it means something that you do yourself that isn't artificially enhanced. It's everything you have through hard work, through training, through all the natural means that you can get to the performance that you can do at the end of the day.
For me, 100% Me means I know there's nothing that I'll take in my body that I don't know why I'm taking it, what I'm taking it for.
When I go out there, everything comes from that natural work that I've put in, and there have been no shortcuts taken. And because of that, you can have 100% pride in what you achieve. It's not to do with anything that you might have taken. It's because you are the phenomenal athlete that you are.
What you saw out on the track was a product of me as an individual and nothing else. And that to me is you know, a wonderful thing to be able to say.
So do look on the UCAD's website for some more information regarding what they do and how they do it. Strongly suggest you look at WADA's website and the UCAD's website as well. So UCAD also have international partners, which is WADA, and we're going to look at them in a second. And they basically collaborate on consequences for cheating. And there are consequences. So if you are caught, you may have to return earnings from the competition. There might be legal action against you from sponsors for damage to their image. You will be stripped of records, and you may potentially get a lifetime ban. So you've got to really think about whether it is worth the risk for that. Now, obviously, some athletes do think it is worth the risk, and some don't, and compete fairly as well. So, you know, there's two sides to this story. Let's have a little bit more look about WADA and what they do themselves. This is what they say they do.
Sport brings out the best in us. Dedication, courage and hard work, respect for the game and the people who play it. But sport also brings out the worst in some of us. Athletes who use performance-enhancing drugs cheat everyone. Their families and fans, fellow athletes, but most of all, themselves. After all, sport is really all about equality. We are WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency headquartered in Montreal, Canada. We're the result of a unique partnership between sport and governments worldwide with a mission to help athletes play true. That's why the World Anti-Doping Code was created, to protect athletes, to protect sport, and to protect greater public health. Accepted by nearly 600 international organizations and all Olympic sports, it's the foundation for anti-doping efforts everywhere. In effect, the core framework for harmonized anti-doping policies, rules, and regulations in all countries, in all sports. We promote honesty, integrity, and equality in sport through education and outreach, teaching the real value of playing clean, as well as the many dangers and consequences of doping. We facilitate and monitor the work of sport, government, and many others who analyze and investigate. In fact, our research program is the only international program dedicated to the development of methods to detect doping abuse. After all, our fight is everyone's fight. Every athlete, every parent, every coach, trainer, and doctor, every government, sports federation, and lab, every Olympic committee, even every fan. We're proud to be leading the fight because our responsibility is to the smallest child all the way up to the Olympic medalist. We know we can't change things overnight, but we do know things have to change. And we know we're already making a difference. That's why we do what we do, so everyone can play true.
Okay, quite a strong video there from WADA. So obviously we have got a lot of problems as a world to try to stop drugs cheats taking over and ruining sports for clean athletes. But there's definitely things that are happening which are trying to challenge them and trying to stop them from taking place. But one of the things you've got to think about is one of your own opinions you've got to get out across to these long answer questions is what we are doing, is that enough? Is it effective? And should we be looking at other things? And should we be changing sanctions? And should we just allow people to take what they want, or should we actually put a limit on what they can take? So there's a lot of issues and things that we can take from this. Okay, this is a very interesting video. Although it's not directly on the specification, it's good for you to understand and know the process of what testing an athlete looks like, because you can also see about the man hours that are actually going into one particular test and how much it might actually cost. So there's lots of very relevant things in this video, a very interesting video about, you know, one person getting tested and what it means to them and how it actually is gone about. So have a look at this video.
Doping control is an essential part of anti-doping programs to promote and protect the integrity of sport and the health of athletes. Testing is carried out in accordance with the World Anti-Doping Code and a series of international standards. Hi, I am a doping control officer, also known as a DCO. I play a major role in protecting your rights in the doping control process, which consists of 5 phases. Athlete selection, athlete notification, sample collection, sample analysis, and results management. How can you be selected for testing? Testing can be conducted in 2 situations: in competition and out of competition. For in-competition testing, the selection may occur in a number of ways, including by random selection, based on finishing position, or by being targeted for a particular reason. For out-of-competition testing, you may be tested anytime, anywhere, with no advance notice. If you have been identified in a registered testing pool, you will be required to provide whereabouts information. You may be tested at home, at your training location, or other relevant locations. How will you be notified? The notification process is the same for both in and out of competition testing. If you are selected for testing, I will show you my DCO accreditation to demonstrate that I am authorized to conduct testing. I will also explain your rights and responsibilities in the doping control process and ask you to sign a form. Once you have been notified, you must report immediately to the doping control station. You may request a delay for a valid reason, such as you are taking part in a medal ceremony. You must attend a press conference. You require medical treatment. Upon notification, a DCO or chaperone will stay at your side at all times until the testing process has been completed. What is the sample collection process? During this process, you also have specific rights, such as having a representative with you, as well as certain responsibilities. I will first ask you for a valid photo ID to confirm your identity. You will be asked to provide 1 or more urine samples and/or blood samples. When you are ready to provide a urine sample, a doping control official of the same gender as you will witness the passing of the sample and will stay with you until you provide a sample that meets all requirements. You will then be asked to divide the urine sample into B and A bottles and then seal them. Throughout the process, you will be the only one to handle the sample collection equipment, unless you require assistance. Finally, you will be asked to review and sign the doping control form. The samples and a copy of the form that does not disclose your identity will be sent to a WADA-accredited laboratory, while the other copies will go to the relevant anti-doping organizations. A copy of the form will also be provided to you. How are the samples analyzed? Once your A sample arrives at the laboratory, it will be opened and analyzed. The B sample will be securely stored. Should the A sample reveal an adverse analytical finding, the B sample will be analyzed to confirm the result. How are the results managed? The lab will report the results to the anti-doping organization responsible for results management. A copy will be sent to WADA to ensure the accountability of the process. In the event of an adverse analytical finding, your rights include requesting and attending the B sample analysis within set deadlines, a fair hearing, and the right to an appeal. As an essential deterrent, a standard doping control process across all countries helps protect the right of athletes to compete on a level playing field in the true spirit of sport.
Okay, very interesting video. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. Obviously, there's lots and lots that go into testing one athlete, and you think about how labor intensive that is and how much it would cost to employ those people and through all the processes of the results management. It's quite an expensive task, and that's one of the problems that WADA faces, the funding for all of these to take place. You also have the problems that, each individual country, or a lot of individual countries have their own anti-doping agencies, and but the standard of those across the world is very, very different. So obviously UCAD and USADA are two leading organizations who are very well funded and very well backed, but that's not the case in other minority countries or maybe developing countries, and they don't have the same systems. We've also got the problem with one which we mentioned in our last video about institutionalized doping from organizations or from countries themselves who, we look at the alleged doping from Russia. It was alleged that when these people gave their samples, they were stored overnight, and at night time they would break into the storage area, and they would actually take their A and B samples, and they would replicate them using specific already manufactured bottles, because the bottles they use have anti-tamper caps. So these were allegedly recreated, and they would take their samples and replace them with samples which they knew were clean from a time when they were not doping. And that's the whole issue with the Russia saga, which we saw, which led to their banning of the Olympic Games in Rio, and potentially further fallouts going on from that. Okay, so what problems do we have, and what more can be done? And for this, we can talk about, and you should be talking about in your long answer questions, because if you get a question about drugs in sport, it's likely to be an 8 or 15 mark question, and they might ask you for your opinion. So they might ask you to critically analyze the effectiveness of anti-doping measures, for example, and you would need to say, are they effective? Yes, no. Why are they effective? And you can argue for and against. So you can argue, yes, they are effective, and you can say that basically there's been a decrease in drugs use and an increase in punishments, and it's harder for the drugs cheats to get away with it. Or you could argue against it and say it's not effective because there's still so many cases that are happening worldwide, and some high profile cases, and they are cheating clean athletes. But then the most important bit, so once you get argued for and against, you then need to say what can be done and what is being done and what more can be done. So what else can be done to try to stop athletes from cheating? Well, we can further promote clean athletes as positive role models around the world. We can name and shame drugs cheats, and through negative role models. And we can see this media article here of Dwayne Chambers. We can maybe give more severe bans for the athletes. Should we give lifetime bans on first offences? That's obviously open to debate and discussion. Do we give prison sentences? Because obviously they're taking illegal substances and they're trying to cheat the system. And obviously, should we give further campaigns worldwide and better education? And all of these are very relevant points. It's not going to be challenge free though. There's lots and lots of problems that we that we face as a world to try to minimize the effects. So, athletes who train overseas, we have problem of accessing their whereabouts. Athletes are supposed to be giving whereabouts, as we saw in the video. They need to submit where they are and what time, so the anti-doping agency can come and or DCO can come and take their samples. And that's for every professional athlete. They need to give their whereabouts, which is obviously time consuming for everybody. And those who go to train overseas, it's very difficult to send someone to test them. So that's one problem we have. Second one is that new drugs are being developed faster than they are being detected. So it's very hard to detect some drugs, and some drugs can actually be flushed out your system by using those masking agents we talked about earlier in this video. There's also banned substances which are prescribed as medicines, which also contain banned substances, which are quite difficult to justify. And there are obviously drugs which you potentially can take if you are medically need them, but you obviously need to explain them and get permission for them to be taken. Obviously, UKAD are leading the fight against abusers within the UK, but other countries are not, and there's a lot of countries which don't give the same financial support as the UK do. And there's also varied sanctions of bans for the same offences worldwide. So you very much need to give for and against. There's been lots and lots of debates. One of those debates is whether to legalise drugs or not. And we're going to watch this short video about whether we should legalise drugs or should we be against them.
The Olympics has always been the ultimate test of the fastest, highest and strongest athletes. And now it seems like a test of which athletes and countries can get away with using prohibited drugs or supplements to win that test. According to a 2014 report from the World Anti-Doping Agency, between 1 to 3% of elite athletes test positive for the presence of at least one banned substance. So your mind probably turns to those who have been caught. Think Lance Armstrong, Marion Jones, Ben Johnson, and very recently, Russian gymnast Nikolai Kusenkov. I guess 1 or 2% of athletes doesn't seem like a big deal. But in another 2010 report, an anonymous survey revealed that 29 to 45% of athletes admitted to doping. It seems like Lance and Marion have a fair bit of company. So why do only a small percentage of athletes who are doping get caught and reprimanded for it? And how is that fair to the athletes who actually follow the rules? A big problem is that doping is difficult to catch. Biological testing fails to detect a lot of these substances, and there are a lot of substances. According to the United States Anti-Doping Agency, there are 10 different classes of drugs most commonly used. The most well-known are anabolic agents or steroids, peptide hormones, and human growth factor. Other classes of performance-enhancing drugs include beta-2 agonists, which typically treat asthma, stimulants used for ADHD, narcotics, cannabinoids derived from marijuana, glucocorticosteroids, beta blockers, and diuretics. And a somewhat newer performance enhancer, blood doping includes some medications like EPO, synthetic oxygen carriers, and blood transfusions, all used in order to increase an athlete's red blood cell count. So that's a pretty long list, and each individual drug has a different physiological effect on your body. For example, testosterone, an anabolic agent, helps build muscle mass without increasing fat. It increases aerobic endurance and overall strength. But on the flip side, it can also cause acne, male pattern baldness, increased aggression, and stunted growth in younger athletes. Another prohibited substance, human growth factor, is thought to increase an athlete's muscle mass and energy, but it can also lead an athlete to experience severe headaches, arthritis, high blood pressure, and even tumours. These physiological side effects are pretty obvious, and it is possible to test for these drugs. Other forms of doping are much more difficult to detect, like blood transfusions, and each form requires its own test, and each test takes time. Also, new performance-enhancing drugs are constantly being developed, and some athletes are always looking for new ways to dope undetected. Taking epitestosterone alongside testosterone often fools drug tests, as does taking several different performance enhancers at low doses. It's no wonder that so many athletes slip through the cracks undetected. Social psychology research has shown when the risk of getting caught is lower, more people cheat. And when people are perceived to be cheating, it's more likely others start to cheat too. So, to stop doping from a psychological perspective, the chances of getting caught need to increase and the benefits of cheating need to decrease. But this assumes that in the world of banned substances, both getting caught and cheating have a somewhat linear relationship. And it's complicated. Not all performance-enhancing drugs are banned from professional sports. Caffeine, for example, was legalized in 2004, despite being known to extend endurance. Using an altitude tent to increase the number of red blood cells in your blood is also okay, while injecting the hormone EPO, which has the same effect, is not. According to University of Oxford bioethicist Julian Savulescu, certain methods of doping are allowed because we as a society see them as natural. He calls it the nature bias, where we take a moral stance that anything artificial is bad for the spirit of sports. So instead of allowing this nature bias to influence how we determine what performance enhancers are acceptable, why don't sports just allow doping? They allow other unnatural aspects of sport, like carbon fiber vaulting poles and aerodynamic helmets. In the conversation, Savulescu writes that we should allow physiological doping, putting limits on hormone levels and red blood cell counts, and testing whether those levels are safe rather than how they were achieved. If we had an enforceable set of rules, experts and doctors could assist and monitor athletes to make sure they're healthy, rather than athletes and teams self-administering drugs that are potentially harmful just to get an edge. Athletic agencies would also be able to better focus their drug tests, narrowing in on the most dangerous methods of performance enhancement. The doping problem is not going away. So instead of trying to eliminate doping, should we meet in the middle? And to find out more of the weird and interesting effects of performance-enhancing drugs on your body, head over to the awesome channel.
Okay, so hopefully you've taken from that video that there's lots of issues there. There's obviously calls to legalize drugs to a certain extent, and there's calls to ban them completely and increase the consequences from a psychological point of view to minimize athletes taking them. So things that you could debate about. So you could say and argue for taking drugs. You could say that basically the testing process and the detecting process is very expensive and time consuming and resource heavy, which we've already talked about. So basically, why not let people take drugs? We could also say that they are widespread and available to purchase easily, very easily on the internet, even from an amateur performer, and therefore is another reason why you should just let people take them. New drugs are being developed, difficult to detect, and this is an interesting one. Is that we've talked about oxygen tents and different kind of legal aids before about how they can increase oxygen carrying capacity. That they have the same effects as taking EPO. So why is one banned and one's not? So should they therefore legalize it? And some potentially, or it's difficult to take if it's in supplements, and there's so many banned substances that prohibited substances that you're likely to take one. But there's also the thought that if drugs are legalized, you could potentially keep that level playing field because everyone's taking the drugs, so everyone should be at the same level. Some countries, like we've mentioned, Russia used institutionalized doping. So why should that country have an advantage over other countries? And you also got the fact that athletes themselves, they can choose what they want to consume and when they want to consume it. So we should just let them make the decision whether they want to take drugs or not. We've also got the case that drug testing is maybe ineffective because we have so many drugs cheats being caught every year that the actual process or the rewards of it obviously far outweighs and outstrips the sanctions. So the fact that so many people are doing it means that the we've not got the system correct and not got the system right. If you're going to argue against drug taking, you could say that even if drugs were legalized, the most developed countries are still going to get an advantage because they still have the advancements in science and technology and investments in medical pharmaceutical companies. So they're likely to still get the advantage over less developed countries. Obviously, long-term side effects and short-term side effects of drug consumption. So we should be trying to protect the athletes rather than expose them to these side effects. Athletes would therefore be pressurized to take drugs if they want to take part in sport, which we shouldn't really be doing. If we were to allow drugs to be legalized, you're gonna create a generation of negative role models for society, and the whole drugs themselves, they go against the traditional amateur views. You think about the Olympic code, the morality of amateurism and fair play, and this is obviously the traditional modern sport view. Athletes, there's an argument that rather than getting instant success, they should train harder and be more dedicated in their performance. And obviously drug taking themselves, taking drugs is illegal quite often. So it is considered cheating and dangerous and against the law. And eventually you're going to lead to a negative image of sport and loss of sponsorship and funding. Okay, I'm going to stop there, this video. Please do have a look at some of the questions, which I will also post for you, and try to take all of that in. There's a lot of information, so do go back through this and try to add to your spider diagram from the first video, the first task we did. Just try to add all of the information in that we have completed. If you want some questions, you can press pause on the next few slides, where I'm going to whip through them quickly so you can watch them, press pause, do the question, answer will follow. So the first question, why might elite athletes resort to taking illegal performance enhancing drugs? Pause that because the answers are coming up. Second question, what are the physiological reasons behind why an elite performer may use EPO? Pause the video. The answers are coming up. And the third question, critically evaluate the suggestion that doping is necessary at elite level. So critically evaluate, that's for and against, and summarize the suggestion that doping is necessary at the elite level. 8 marks worth of answers. Okay, add to your mind map, and you can also watch some of these as well, which I highly recommend you do, and read around this topic area. There's so much information out there, so please do take your time to research it as a whole. Hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time for the next broadcast. Enjoy.